EPA official admitted on March 28th that the devices used to test air quality in East Palestine, Ohio, are not capable of detecting all chemicals of concern that were released from the controlled burn after the train derailment in early February. This is according to new reporting from independent journalist Louis DeAngelis. The EPA also acknowledged that the threat of lawsuits against the agency has influenced their decision-making in relation to East Palestine. That's according to the report.
Status Coup News has continued to cover the situation on the ground in East Palestine. Here's just one recent interview with a resident.
Yeah, it's super wishy-washy about who gets it and who doesn't. And I mean, they've told me I was in it and then I was out and then I was in and out. And then it's not even going by the mile, the evacuation zone anymore. It's city limits. And it depends on who you are. There's people in the same situation as me who has had their air tested okay by their group, which is still obviously not okay. We're still getting sick. It still smells. Some people have been compensated for their hotel stays since then, and I had a 2-week period where I wasn't. Right. And now I am because of this whole temporary relocation, but it's a joke. And $1,000 for a family. I mean, it costs $1,500 for a 1 week at an Airbnb, which is lower rates than a hotel sometimes.
Yeah, no, it's insane. I'm glad you brought up the point that it's not like you're going and enjoying your time staying at this hotel.
No.
You've got all of your belongings are in town here, right? In your house for the most part. You take what you can with you to go deal with this sort of stuff, and then you're running back and forth. You don't have all your things with you. To your point, you've got your pets, your kids, all in one room. You don't have a stove to cook on.
And
you're eating
not reimbursing us for any of that stuff. So we got $1,000 for my son and I, which it actually doesn't even cover a week's worth of just lodging alone. And then they said they're going to cover food and gas, but everything else is just we're left to replace on our own.
Here to tell us more about the situation is investigative reporter Louis DeAngelis. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me on again.
So, Louis, tell us more about this EPA admission. There are chemicals of concern that were released from this controlled burn that were never tested for. And in spite of that, people were told that their air quality had tested as safe?
Yeah, so essentially we learned quite a bit at a town hall event put on last week by an organization called River Valley Organizing. At this town hall, there were kind of 3 major bombshells, and the first is what you brought up right here, so we can start right there. In regards to residential air testing. So from the beginning, residential air testing has been offered to folks who were coming back to their homes after the quote unquote controlled burn, vent and burn. You've probably heard it referred to in many different ways at this point. And these residential tests essentially included a representative from the EPA as well as a representative from a contractor hired by the railroad to come into your home and do an inspection with a handheld air testing device. This device is called a photoionization detector. For short, it's a PID. And residents have been skeptical of these tests from the beginning, mainly because when they walk into their homes, some of these homes, even as recently as a week and a half ago, 2 weeks ago when I was in East Palestine last, still have a chemical smell in them. Residents are still, after being exposed to the smell, dealing with some of the health symptoms that we've talked about before as a result. And for the first time now, we actually have the EPA admitting that one of the chemicals in question, it's called butyl acrylate, is not going to be picked up at the EPA's action level or action phase for this chemical. So the action level is 20 parts per billion for where action should be taken. You should remove yourself from the situation. You shouldn't spend an over amount of time in that condition. The devices that are being used will only pick up butyl acrylate at 100 parts per billion. So obviously 5 times higher than the EPA's action level, and that's according to EPA official Mark Durno, who spoke at this town hall.
So were they forced to concede this essentially after residents were still saying, we feel sick in our homes or we're seeing other evidence of potential contamination? What prompted them to actually make this disclosure?
Yeah, I mean, it sure seems like what you're pointing out here. So we had a resident actually ask a very specific question on this point. And the resident kind of asked the question and looked at the EPA member, Mark Durno, and kind of was like, and you could tell that Mark Durno knew that the question was coming and they had already talked about this privately. So just like the conversation with dioxins that has been had over this whole ordeal in East Palestine, where residents had to beg and plea to get testing for dioxins and finally are starting to get tests for dioxins being done. Again, here it is resident pressure leading to some of these things finally starting to be admitted, some of these things finally starting to be done.
And what are the effects of butyl acrylate?
So butyl acrylate still will cause a lot of the similar symptoms that we've been hearing of: sore throats, potential breathing complications, all of these things. It is, in comparison to vinyl chloride, less harmful, but it's still something that you do not want to be exposed to for a long period of time. What I will say, though, in additional digging that I have done on these air testing devices, these PIDs, I've spoke with several experts on and off the record. These are folks who are PhDs in chemistry, folks with toxicology degrees who use this stuff on the regular. These PIDs will not pick up several other chemicals of concern. So when you burn vinyl chloride, like was done in this case here, it creates several chemical byproducts ranging from formaldehyde is one of them, phosgene is another one, hydrogen chloride. Phosgene is something that, with several experts that I have talked to, would never be picked up by this PID device. Formaldehyde will only be picked up with this PID device if it has a special attachment on it. But if you're using that special attachment, you can't be doing the tests for the other chemicals of concern. I've seen dozens of these residential home test results that have been provided to residents at this point, and results for formaldehyde have never been on the form. It's only these very broad tests for VOCs, or volatile organic compounds. So that tells me that formaldehyde has not been tested for in a residential home test, and phosgene can't be with the devices that are being used.
Are they going to do additional testing or offer additional testing for these contaminants that have not been picked up using the testing they were doing so far?
At this point, there's no word on additional residential home tests being done by the EPA, being done by contractors of the railroad. There are more independent testers in town at this point. Dr. Andrew Welton from Purdue University has been doing residential home tests. He's done home tests recently with residents that I've been in touch with. Those results have not been released yet, but as soon as we get them, I'll be very curious to see what this independent testing is finding in the residential home tests in comparison to what was found by the EPA and the railroad contractors when they did their tests. Looking at it right now, I mean, this Andrew Welton just released test results in the creek water and the streams that are heavily polluted in town, and the results from the EPA and from the Ohio EPA and from Dr. Welton's group, who's been doing the research here, are actually very different, which is concerning. So it just leads to more questions as we start to see some of these additional results come in, unfortunately.
Now, I want to ask you a little bit of a political question. There was a lot of interest in East Palestine in the weeks, well, first, no interest at all, and then eventually a lot of interest as major figures like Donald Trump visited. There was a lot of pressure on the Biden administration to send someone. Biden still hasn't visited, but Pete Buttigieg, transportation secretary, ultimately did. Do you feel like there are still people who are visiting the town, that there is still a level of engagement and coverage? Are you seeing that wane as the weeks go by?
The coverage has absolutely waned, and that's not just coming from me. That's coming from the residents who are there. They are not seeing the type of coverage on this sort of thing. Again, this town hall that I got all this event, and there's another element of it I would like to talk about related to the vent and burn after I answer your question. But this town hall had maybe one or two local journalists at it that did not cover the information that I just gave you in regards to the air testing. We put out the piece on Substack, and literally nobody else has talked about a lot of this stuff in any real way. I mean, the EPA made several big admissions here, again, first on air testing and then on the vent and burn that I'd like to talk about after this. So it blows my mind that they're not getting the coverage. Unfortunately, I mean, I haven't heard any real updates on any new railroad, regulation legislation coming in. So residents definitely feel like they've been abandoned on this issue. They feel like they need to continue to try to raise their voices. And frankly, the amount of text messages I'm getting from residents right now is increasing, because I think that those messages are not getting through to all of the other journalists who maybe covered this for a period of time, but have since moved on.
There was also reporting in the last few days about CDC employees getting sick in East Palestine. Have you been following that at all? Can you tell us anything about that?
Yeah, so I mean, you mentioned it right there. CDC employees who were in kind of studying the health effects, not even right at the site. They were actually studying the health effects by going, door to door, essentially talking to residents. a number of members on their team got sick, and lo and behold, they leave town and they start to feel better. A lot of residents that I've been talking with are they're not happy that these folks are getting sick, but they're happy that their concerns are being seen now, not by just by the residents speaking out, because unfortunately, again, these are things that are hard to prove with a video camera, with a photo. These are things that can only be experienced by the folks, unfortunately, going through exactly what is going on here. So, residents they're not happy that these folks are getting sick, obviously, but if the CDC members are getting sick, why are these people being told that it is still okay to be in town? That doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, and Louis, what is it that we should know about the controlled burn?
Absolutely. So on the controlled burn, initially, obviously the derailment happens on a Friday night. The controlled burn began on Monday. The initial plan was to vent and burn one car of vinyl chloride. That was the message that had gotten out there. The EPA said that they had provided guidance on how to do this, but that ultimately the vent and burn decision was not their decision. On Sunday evening, the plan was to still do this one car vent and burn. On Monday, something changed overnight, and the decision was bumped from one car of vinyl chloride to 5 cars of vinyl chloride. On Sunday, according to Mark Durno, the EPA representative at this event, on that Sunday, modeling had been provided by the EPA for what would happen with a one-car vent and burn. That means modeling for all of this contaminants going up into the air. Where are they going to spread out to? What should the evacuation zone look like? So on Sunday night, that is the plan. And then I want to read a direct quote here from Mark Durno. Quote, "On Monday, we learned that they had made the decision to vent and burn 5 cars. We were not part of that decision." So EPA was not part of the decision to vent and burn 5 cars. They only had provided modeling for the vent and burn of 1 car of vinyl chloride. How the heck did they know what the evacuation zone should be? How did they know where the contaminants were going to go? The answer is that they probably didn't know. And then the other big question here is, who is the they? On Monday, we learned that they had made the decision to vent and burn. We reached out to the EPA for clarification on this. We have not received it. But in a lot of folks I'm talking with, including officials at the state level in Pennsylvania, there's a lot of speculation that the they here is Norfolk Southern making that decision to go from 1 car to 5. I don't know that for certain at this point, but given the information that we have, this is a huge deal that has really been missed by a lot of. It's been missed by frankly everybody. Residents in town cannot get over that the decision was made to go from 1 car to 5 without the appropriate modeling being done.
Louis, that's incredible reporting you're doing. You said you've been posting this on your Substack as well?
Yep, so this has all been coming out on the Status Coup Substack. Folks can check it out there. It's substack.statuscoup.com. We've been putting out a lot of information there. There's more coming as well. Both my colleague Jordan Sheridan and I have been speaking with residents basically every day. We've got a lot of stuff in the works, so we definitely encourage folks to check that out, as well as our YouTube channel, just youtube.com/statuscoup.
Thank you, Louis. We really appreciate you joining us today.
Thank you both for having me.
We'll have more Rising right after this.